Proxy wars and the Cold War, they go together like Fred and Ginger or Bender and Blackjack. They were an inherent part of how the Cold War was waged, as both regional and superpowers preferred to avoid direct confrontation. So, third-party countries found themselves torn apart. While the situation in Vietnam and in Afghanistan are well known, the far lesser known 8-year-long civil war in North Yemen undoubtedly belongs in the same category. There, a conflict between the Royalists and the Republicans drew the attention of multiple foreign powers looking to gain influence, especially Nasser's Egypt, which saw as many as 70,000 Egyptian soldiers being deployed. I'm your host David, and today we are going to look at the North Yemen Civil War, also nicknamed Nasser's Vietnam. This is the Cold War.
It's the holiday season again, and with that sometimes comes the struggle to find the perfect gift for that person in your life, which is why I am thrilled to be working with the sponsor of today's video, Ridge. The slim and sleek Ridge wallet holds up to 12 cards and still has room for cash, so no more bulky wallets, and the matching key case silently holds up to 6 keys. Best of all, Ridge's RFID blocking material keeps digital pickpockets at bay. They come in over 30 different colors and styles, and make sure to check out the new Hyperline wallet and key set designed to light up the night, as well as the new ceramic powder wallets with their soft touch finish. Ridge has over 3 million customers and over 80,000 5-star reviews, and not only do items come with a lifetime warranty, you can try them risk-free for 99 days. Shop the holiday sale by going to ridge.com/TCW and get up to 30% off through December 20th. And if you use our link, be sure to enter your email or SMS for a free chance to win a Ridge bundle worth $4,000. That link again is ridge.com/TCW. Thanks, Ridge, and now back to the video.
Now, this video picks up where our last video on Yemen left off, when the country's theocratic monarchy was sort of overthrown in 1962. Please check it out if you haven't already, the link is in the description. But that being said, we left Yemen at the very start of a civil war, with an Egyptian military intervention getting underway. So let's first address the positions of the two sides. The newborn Yemen Arab Republic, led by President Abdullah al-Salal, had military forces that were simply inadequate to be able to fight the royalists on their own. They instead had to rely on Egyptian soldiers, ammunition, artillery, armor, and even their air force, to the point where Egypt essentially was the war effort. They had control over urban areas where the population was more modernist and susceptible to the ideas of republicanism and Arab nationalism, a regional movement strongly supported by Nasser. 3 cities were of particular importance: the capital of Sana'a, the former second capital of Taiz, and the port city of Hodeidah. Together, they constituted what was known as the Strategic Triangle, the cornerstone of the Egyptian war effort. Every Republican operation of the war had in mind the security of this triangle, as well as that of the road network connecting the 3 cities. The Royalists, on the other hand, derived their support from the countryside, with its more conservative population and its religious devotion to the King of Yemen, Imam al-Badr. They did, however, have control over several cities in the north. From there, it was possible to maintain their supply lines that linked the Royalist forces with their allies in Saudi Arabia. Those cities included the mountain fortress of Hajjah, the ancient city of Marib, and the border town of Sada. This border town would actually become the site of the first significant battle of the Civil War. In October 1962, Egyptian paratroopers arrived in Sada without major opposition and established a base there, but were then put under siege by Royalist militias. Many locals sided with the Egyptians and the Republic, while the Royalists cut off roads leading to the city. By means of superior artillery fire, but suffering heavy casualties, Egyptian armor broke the siege and pushed the tribesmen into the hills. Sada was an important victory, not least of which was that it convinced the Western Bloc that the Republic controlled most of the country and led the United States and many Western European nations to recognize it as the legitimate North Yemeni government. The war, however, was far from over. That winter, the Royalists launched a counter-offensive. At Sirwa, they defeated a force of 180 Egyptian paratroopers, and then a mere 20 miles north of Sana'a, they overturned Egyptian tanks using tree trunks as levers to flip the vehicles over, then burning them together with the soldiers inside. The royalists largely preferred to avoid direct confrontation with the Republican, Yemeni, and Egyptian forces, instead cutting enemy lines of communication and targeting and capturing enemy convoys. The pattern of offensives and counteroffensives would continue for years. 1963, the Egyptian-led Ramadan offensive would involve over 30,000 Egyptian soldiers and push the royalists north and east of the strategic triangle, capturing Marib, only for those results to be reversed the next year by a royalist counteroffensive. In August 1964, the new Harad offensive would aim to capture Imam's base in Al-Qara. The Republican forces slowly took one mountain stronghold after another, pushing the royalists to the Saudi border, but sustaining heavy casualties in the process, and they were unable to capture Imam himself. Importantly, during the Harad offensive, for the first time, the majority of Republican troops were Yemeni rather than Egyptian. Throughout the war, the Republic tried to attract Yemeni tribal militias to their side, but they had little success. Nominally pro-Salal tribesmen would shoot to miss, collect bribes, frequently switch sides, and generally just had more interest in pillaging the local population and hoarding supplies than in following the Egyptian battle plan. British correspondent Patrick Seal described the tribal militias like this: "Whereas the Egyptians seem uncertain where they are, the Yemeni tribes are enjoying opportunities for loot on a scale probably unparalleled since the incense caravans of Sheba. I met a man who had acquired 80 Egyptian blankets, another had a couple of hundred cans of excellent Egyptian beans, children were dressed in rags of parachute silk, and every royalist camp was littered with captured weapons, bazooka bombs, boxes of grenades, and Egyptian cigarettes." The inability for either side to gain an upper hand eventually led to the start of peace negotiations. Talks had actually occurred as early as the first months of the war, with the United States serving as a mediator. In early 1963, Ellsworth Bunker, the same US diplomat who had the year before been a mediator in the West New Guinea dispute, engaged in shuttle diplomacy between Cairo, Riyadh, and New York, trying to secure a mutual disengagement plan. The deal involved the Saudis ending their aid to the royalists and the Egyptians withdrawing their forces from the Republic. On April 10, 1963, the agreements were signed and passed to the United Nations for mediation. What became known as the UN Yemen Observer Mission, however, is widely considered a failure, held up as a symbol of the impotence of global peacekeeping. The 189-man mission, composed mainly of Canadian and Yugoslavian troops, was to a large degree funded by Egypt and Saudi Arabia. The peacekeepers, whose mandate was placed over a 20-kilometer-wide demilitarized zone between Yemen and Saudi Arabia, were to observe the end of Saudi aid to the royalists, while their colleagues in Sana'a and Hodeida would observe the Egyptian military withdrawal. The only thing that they did observe, however, was the Saudi caravans still carrying weapons to the royalists, and Egyptian soldiers leaving Yemen for Egypt, and to be replaced by new Egyptian soldiers. The mandate gave no ability for the observers to intervene. Having produced nothing substantial but observations, the UN mission expired in 1964 after Yugoslavia withdrew its soldiers and Saudi Arabia withdrew its funds. Clearly, a lasting peace was impossible without the mutual desire of both Egypt and Saudi Arabia to end the fighting. The two sides did try to reach an agreement in 1965 when Nasser and King Faisal signed an agreement to mutually disengage from their war-torn mutual neighbor, but the supposed second round of talks never occurred. The British plan of withdrawal from the next-door state of Aden gave Nasser a good reason to stay in North Yemen, even if it meant maintaining a bulk of the Egyptian army there. Keep in mind as well that nearly everyone in the region preferred that Nasser's attention remain trapped in Yemen rather than stirring up some other nest of trouble elsewhere in the Middle East. To this end, both the US and the USSR actively encouraged Nasser to keep fighting. Yemen became a cage for Arab nationalism. Of course, before we just assign Yemen to the list of acceptable and preferred war zones, we need to recognize that the Yemeni people themselves were never consulted to see if they agreed with the plan the world had developed for it. Guess what? They did not agree. In the Republican camp, a third force was growing, referred to as moderates. They understood how harmful the war was for Yemen as a nation, they were opposed to the Egyptian military presence, and they were in opposition to President Salal, yet they were not royalists, and they didn't think much of Imam al-Badr either. They envisioned a compromise solution for the country, maybe a decentralized republic, or even a constitutional monarchy, albeit with a different dynasty in charge. Contact between the moderates and the royalists followed. After the first meetings, one of the moderate leaders, the increasingly popular Muhammad al-Zubari, was assassinated, although it was unclear which of the two sides carried out the murder. Several pro-Republican tribes were outraged and demanded Salal appoint another moderate, Ahmad Numan, as his prime minister. Salal conceded. So, with their newly acquired political influence, the moderates organized a national peace conference in 1965. It featured over 5,000 tribal notables and produced a new Yemeni constitution. The country would become an Islamic republic with a weak executive and a strong assembly, and would seek support from Saudi Arabia. Salal, though, would have none of it. Reluctant to share power with the moderates, he forced Numan to resign as prime minister, and the moderate leadership was exiled to Egypt. Another round of tribal peace talks took place at the end of the year, but these ended in failure. Members of the ruling dynasty were not invited to these talks, and the royalists, maybe out of spite, clashed with the Egyptian army. Nasser responded by resuming his offensives. The two sides were ready to, once again, give war a chance. So let's look at the two sides. First, the royalists. Their army was in many ways archaic. Most of the generals were members of the royal dynasty, while the most trustworthy unit of this faction was the slave guards of the royal household, who claimed to be descended from Christian Ethiopians cut off from Africa since the 6th century CE. They were receiving foreign support, but so far we've only talked about that being supplied by Saudi Arabia. The royalists, however, had unofficial allies in some surprising places. One such ally was Britain, whose main motive was to keep Nasser as far away from Aden as possible. British mercenaries, along with French ones, took an active part in royalist campaigns, as well as training royalist troops. But another clandestine ally of the kingdom was Israel. Tel Aviv had no problem assisting a theocratic Islamic regime, provided it was fighting against Nasser. There was a mutual understanding of how disastrous public Israeli support for the royalists would be PR-wise, and all military aid was to be kept secret. Israeli intelligence in Yemen remained active, mostly staffed by Yemenite Jews, and a total of 14 Israeli airlift missions were conducted, supplying the royalists with military and medical supplies. There was even some degree of hope that the cooperation between Israel and North Yemen would help heal the rift between Jews and Arabs. We all know how that hope has worked out. But the most bizarre of the royalist allies, and I cannot make this up, was the philatelic community. Stamp collectors. Seriously. An American, Bruce Chalmers, was a huge fan of stamp collecting. He once wrote to the King of Yemen asking for stamps and received an answer from al-Badr back when he was a crown prince. The two became friends. At some point, Bruce decided to claim descendancy from the French royal family, changed his name to Bruce Condé, moved to Yemen, denounced his American citizenship, and converted to Islam. In the royalist camp, Bruce organized the postal system and made sure that the royalist stamps were always of better quality than the Republican ones. Bruce Condé's articles were frequent in Lynn's Stamp News, an American weekly magazine for stamp collectors, and they did attract both attention and support to the royalist cause from the global philatelic community. The war itself was depicted as a war for stamp sovereignty. Later, this stamp collecting Lawrence of Arabia would rise to the rank of a royalist general, adopt several more names, including Alfonso Yorba, Haji Abdul Rahman, and General Bruce Alfonso de Bourbon, would eventually settle in Morocco and marry Beatrice Dolgoruki, an alleged great-granddaughter of Nicholas II of Russia and a claimant to the vacant throne of Ukraine. Which is exactly what you expected to hear in this episode. Now, let's turn our attention to Egypt. After several largely inconsequential offensives and failed peace negotiations, Nasser opted for a so-called long breath strategy. Behind this seemingly innocuous name hides a campaign that belongs on the list of the worst war crimes of the Cold War, and probably of the 20th century overall for that matter, which, let's be honest, is saying something. Rather than continuing to throw columns of armored cars away to royalist ambushes, Egypt increased the intensity of its aerial bombardment, aiming to hinder royalist troops and supply movement, as well as to demoralize the local Yemeni population. The Egyptian use of unguided, incendiary, and delayed explosion bombs against civilians should likely already count as something evil, but the most terrible part of the bombing campaign was the use of chemical weapons. Nasser pursued a deliberate policy to depopulate the countryside and eliminate support for the royalist guerrillas. An example of this strategy can be seen in the village of Wadi Hiran. During a gas attack on the village, 75 people were killed immediately, with hundreds of others falling sick and later dying due to poison gas-related symptoms. According to the Red Cross, such symptoms included shortness of breath, coughing, pink foam at the mouth, general edema, especially around the face, and yet there were no outward physical injuries. The toxins in the mucus of the victims included phosgene, mustard gas, lewisite, chloride, or cyanide bromide, or Clark 1 and 2. British intelligence added sarin gas to the list and accused the Soviets of supplying the chemical weapons to Egypt to test their effectiveness. The international response was almost non-existent. Saudi Arabia filed a complaint with the United Nations, which pushed the issue to the Security Council. There, any attempt at formal investigation was blocked by the Soviets, who had allegedly supplied Egypt with the chemical weapons in the first place. The Americans, who were busy using their own chemical agents in Vietnam at the time, were not eager for an investigation in Yemen either. The only support the Yemeni locals received was ironically that of Israel, which sent 20,000 gas masks to the royalists in 1967. Now, speaking of Israel and 1967, Egypt was about to suffer one of the most humiliating defeats in its long history, the Six-Day War. With his military in shambles and his air force now in ruin, Nasser once again considered seeking a peace in Yemen. Meeting in Khartoum, Egypt and Saudi Arabia agreed to mutually disengage from the war, and this time they actually followed through. Left without Nasser's support, President Salal boarded a plane from Moscow. The flight, however, was diverted to Baghdad, where Salal would settle to live in exile. In his absence, a coup was launched in Yemen, bringing to power the moderates and their leader, Abdul Rahman al-Eryani. With no Egyptian foe in sight, the royalists launched their final major offensive and laid siege to the capital city of Sana'a. There, the Republicans were aided by separatist forces from South Yemen, as well as by multiple tribes, which, although they had been reluctant to fight for Egypt, were now eager to defend the Republic. General Hassan al-Amri, only recently released from detention in Cairo, commanded the defense of the city, earning himself the nickname the General of Yemen. The Soviet Union airlifted 10,000 tons of medical supplies, food, and ammunition to the besieged city, as well as provided a squadron of MiG-19s. This was enough, and after 70 days of siege, the royalists retreated back north. Enthusiasm for the war was waning. The Soviets soon found themselves a new toy immediately to the south in Aden, where the People's Republic of South Yemen was proclaimed. Royalist tribesmen in the north, who had viewed the war as that of resistance to foreign invaders, now had little reason to fight the Republicans. In 1969, with the royalist cause collapsing, Imam al-Badr agreed to make peace. A unified Republican government was formed with representation from both sides, although without the royal dynasty. Within several weeks, the Yemen Arab Republic was recognized by Saudi Arabia, which quickly became its most trusted ally. As the war ended, the moderate vision became reality. Ironically, the last battle of the war was waged in the same place as the first one, in Sana'a, finally retaken by the royalists. The conflict, which had resulted in the death of hundreds of thousands of human lives, was over. Its only real winner was Saudi Arabia, which had secured itself a friendly buffer state in the south. For Egypt, the war resulted in the end of its expansionist foreign policy and a decline in pan-Arab nationalism. For the United Nations, the conflict was a demonstration of its impotence and ineffectiveness. As for Yemen itself, this was a dark chapter in its history of violence and death and civil wars, and unfortunately, not the last one. More to come on Yemen later, including the Aden emergency and the proxy war between North and South Yemen. We hope you've enjoyed today's episode, and to make sure you don't miss our future work, please make sure to press the subscribe button and the bell button before Nasser's troops reach them, only observed by a lone, powerless UN observer whose mandate doesn't even let him go to the bathroom without asking New York for permission. Please consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/thecoldwar or through YouTube membership. We can be reached via email at thecoldwarchannel@gmail.com. This is the Cold War Channel, and as we think about the Cold War, please remember that history is shades of gray and rarely black and white.